Kit, it's very good to see you. And we've started quite early in the morning today, but you look fully ready for a good working day.
Indeed.
Now, what I normally do is to sort of just get a little bit of some idea of where people began. And I know that you began in, I think, in Winnipeg, in towards the west of Canada, really.
I did. I grew up, I was born in Winnipeg in the prairies and moved to Vancouver Island and grew up there, stayed there until I was 18. And then the family moved to Montreal, and just as I finished school, and that's when I entered McGill.
Yeah.
So I spanned Canada.
Yeah, that's pretty good, because McGill is that in
Montreal.
In Montreal, yeah. So you've gone sort of for quite a long way, well, right the way west in Vancouver Island, and then back across to the other side.
Indeed.
And then, how long you did what at McGill? What did you read?
So I read English and history of art. Actually, changed the history of art because of a fantastic Greek professor. And actually had my first exposure to publishing. Then one of the professors introduced me to a new Canadian literary magazine, so that occupied me somewhat. And I was very fortunate in being there when a lot of Canadian writers and poets were teaching. And so I had just some fantastic connections. And at the end of that time, the World's Fair opened, Expo 67, and I worked there for 6 months in sort of PR.
I remember it as a youngster myself, that sort of period. I can remember the World's Fair happening, and I also remember we had a great program at school about the St. Lawrence Seaway, which had just been complete.
It was fantastic. And it was also a time, though, of the rumblings of Quebec separatism. And of course, the famous Charles de Gaulle speech. He came to Expo 67 and said, "Libre, Quebec, libre." And that caused a bit of a ruckus, as you can imagine. And then shortly after that, I left Montreal.
And you met your husband in Canada, though, because you're both Canadian, aren't you?
We are. My father was British and had come to Canada as a young man. My mother came from pioneer stock, Huguenots from France to Oxfordshire to Canada. And my husband's father was born in Holland. So we had a sort of common British European background. And he studied at Ontario College of Art and then had a scholarship to study at the Royal College of Art after working at Expo. And so we set off in 1968. We packed a trunk and said, "If all goes well, would you please send it?" We traveled Europe for 3 months and then started life in London.
That's really exciting. And I think probably people now wouldn't realize how exciting it would have been at that point, because, not that many people traveled that much. And you did an interesting course at McGill. And so there's a crossover with your husband, because both of you, I mean, you were history of art, and he's an artist, really, isn't he? And a designer. Yeah. So did you meet through the art connection? Or?
No, we actually met through mutual friends in Montreal. I think it had to do with the magazine that I was working on, which probably didn't help my marks, but it certainly led to a more interesting life.
Yeah, very good. So then you arrived over here for your husband to do to go to the Royal College, and you yourself went straight into a job. And tell us a bit about the first thing you did.
So the first job was at Queen magazine, which much later was sold to Nat Mag and then was merged with Harper's. And that was it was an illustrated magazine, rather like Vogue, but a little wacky. And Hugh Johnson, the wine writer, was the editor when I joined. there were wonderful writers and models and photographers wandering through the building. And as a mid-20-year-old coming from the colonies, I was alert to the excitement. And if I was invited, I was a sub-editor, and then they asked me to be beauty editor just because they didn't have someone and I had been subbing the copy. I had no idea what I was doing. And when I was invited to something, the fashion department would let me borrow clothes, which meant that my tiny wardrobe remained very small, but the access to a very large one. And Hugh then left to write his wine atlas, and the magazine was sold. And I really went freelance, mainly freelance for the next few years. I had 2 or 3 years of broadcasting, which I loved, radio interviews for Science Now and Open University, You and Yours, running around with my little tape recorder, learning how to slice and spice the tapes. And that went on until 1974. But those early 70s marked the change from this sort of freewheeling, swinging 60s to a much more bleak period. And when I joined Time Life Books in 1974, it pretty well coincided with the 3-day week. And I don't know if you remember anything about it, but fortunately we all had manual typewriters and we had lots of candles. And we worked at our offices for 3 days a week and at home for 2.
I do remember it well. And there are lots of things that echoes there are really interesting. And by the way, of course, you said that from a young person from the colonies, now you could get away with that because that's where you were coming from, as it were. But if I said that, I'd probably have to be clapped in irons.
I can say it.
You could say it, you could say it. And you went straight to Queen then, as soon as you arrived here?
Yes, after traveling around and applying for various jobs. But it was a period of time when you expected to get a job, some job, not a very well-paying job, but you did find work.
And is Hugh Johnson still around?
Yes, he is. And
Sure.
we've, over the decades, as I look back, I have managed to keep in touch with people from every job and every decade, and it's made life very interesting.
So now we move on to Time Life. Now that must have been a really exciting thing to be mixed up with, because they produced some most marvelous books and material, didn't they? Can you say a bit about?
Yes, yeah. I certainly can. It was fantastic working at Time Life. I was there for 14 years, started as development editor and then moved on. In 1978, I became European editor. And the books really emanated from the magazines. That had been the idea, that you had all the news stories, you had the researchers, you had a culture and a way of reaching readers. And so it really started in the 1960s. And we had very large budgets to get the best writers, the best photographers, the best researchers, and a staff that checked everything, did a lot of editing and a lot of writing, and very, very good quality, not only good quality writing, but good quality printing and pages. And the European office was headquartered in London. The publishers were headquartered in the Netherlands, and the editorial offices that did translations and adaptations were in Paris and Hamburg, Barcelona, Amsterdam, and Milan. So that was my travel schedule. As you can imagine, that was pretty exciting too.
So you've had an amazing life of travel, clearly, and I'm sure made very good use of that. So, and I remember too, I think I'm right in saying that the books that Time Life produced had amazing photography.
But absolutely wonderful. So even if you could have found a photograph for a book from an agency, you tended not to do that, because you wanted the fresh photograph. It wasn't that someone would say, oh, that's been used before, but there was something in the back of a reader's mind that it wasn't fresh. So we would send a photographer off to a J. Maisel off to Israel for 6 weeks. He would come back with 25,000 pictures, and those were edited down to 150.
What an amazing thing, 25,000 to 150. And what has happened to Time and Time Life magazines? They still survive, do they?
They survive, but not in the company that I remember. We were in the Bond Street office, and so we had the bureau chiefs and Fortune and Time and Sports Illustrated and then People magazine sitting in those offices. So we were able to draw on the bureaus around Europe and on their expertise. And it was a very close community. I mean, we were a fairly small group, all of us. A Time magazine is a very thin magazine now, and not with the influence that it used to have. So we had a telex room in Bond Street that ran 24/7. And the news stories and the news would come in 24/7 from the bureaus all around Europe. And so you were always, it's rather exciting to be in the building as things happened, Gorbachev coming in and people being deposed and rows happening, and you were right in the thick of it. And the books became sort of an integral part of that. I mean, we were doing 18, 25, 27 volume series of books that were sold by direct mail. But we were the first company to do that kind of publishing.
I'll never forget the Gorbachev incident, because it must have happened overnight or whatever. And I was, Rossi, my wife, said, all the telephones for you. See, I was in the bathroom, she brought the telephone into the bathroom. And it was the gatekeeper at Lambeth, who had a rather simple view of life. And because I was the international affairs person, he said to me, I'm just telephoning you, Steve. He said, because Mr. Gorbachev's being kidnapped in the Black Sea or whatever. And I thought you ought to know, because I know you're in charge of that sort of thing. Quite what he expected me to do, I don't know, but I remember it vividly.
Get on a plane.
Yeah. So it's interesting, isn't it? Those magazines now, all of the magazines we've talked of were wonderful, sort of iconic magazines, but that sort of magazine, I suppose it's because of the net and various other things. I mean, what's happened to the New Yorker? Is that still going?
Yes, it is. And Time is still there and Fortune is still there. These magazines are accessible, but of course, how they reach their audience and their importance has changed, and changed pretty dramatically. And if you think in the late 70s, we decided to, we could typeset basically in the office. We hired people who had the right equipment and they could lay everything out and typeset it, but the unions didn't allow us to do that. So everything still had to go to the typesetter with our layout, and it would be reset. And if you tried to change that, and we had a union, staff were members of the National Union of Journalists, but there was also Sorgat at the time, and we were just told don't try anything funny. I mean, if you try printing books on the continent, you may find they fall off a dock.
Well, of course, Sorgat I remember, and of course one of our much lamented court members and so on was Brenda Dean, and I can still remember her.
Wonderful.
Yeah, just amazing, yeah.
She was fantastic.
She was, wasn't she? Yes. And I when I was in the House of Lords, the two of us overlapped for a bit. We were both on the defence group, so we used to go be briefed in Whitehall. So you'll know now why you were still safe, because if you had the two of us looking after you. Anyway, then really exciting, because was it straight after Time Life that you set up your own company?
I did. I had decided not to move to the States. I did go there for 6 months when my now 3 sons were under 4. And we went, my husband commuted every month for about 10 days. And the idea was, I was the first non-American to be running something over here. And I think they wanted to see if I could be brought into line. And the idea was perhaps that I moved to the States. So I decided not to do that. And by the late 80s, I just decided it was time for a change. And so I had a brief stint with a newspaper group that had bought the Birmingham Post and Mail and the Coventry Evening Telegraph. And I loved the newspaper world, but I did not love quite how this was organized. And so I joined a man named Munro Pofter, who had a boutique advisory firm. He was a lawyer and had set it up in the States to advise publishing and information companies who wanted to do deals on both sides of the Atlantic. And he kept a little office over here, but he was basically solo with a bit of a back office. And I had met him years before, and he always said to me, I think you'll be very good at this, at the deal business, and I think you would like it. So I knocked on his door, and he said, come and give it a try. And after about 3 months, I really did feel embedded and absolutely loved it. He made sure I had some extra training, and he was a wonderful teacher. And in those days, we had big clients, Pearson and CBS, Wolters Kluwer, Holtzbrinck, VNU, companies that both wanted advice on what might be available, how they would go about it. And Munro was very much a person who liked the network and the introductions and how things worked, as opposed to being just a transaction business. So I got more and more embedded in the deals on both sides of the Atlantic, and they range from quite small to very large. The buyers tended to be the large companies, and our clients on a day-to-day basis for deals tended to be the small independent companies. And of course, that's fantastically exciting because you are just working with really interesting, innovative entrepreneurs who have started amazing businesses. And when they decide to sell, you've probably known them for 3 years, 5 years, 10 years, and you built up a relationship. And it's always just an honor to represent those people, many of whom are stationers. And Munro died rather suddenly in 1995, and I was in the middle of quite a big transaction in Chicago, National Textbook Company. And my big clients, the retainer clients, all said they would like to see me stay in business. It was useful to have someone other than from a big bank who was discreet and who had the right connections, who could get things done quietly behind the scenes. And so I founded the Van Tulleken Company. And over the next decade plus, I built it up to about 15 people with an office in New York and office in London. And during that time, all sorts of things happened. First of all, in 2006, I joined the stationers, mainly through the connections of people like Nigel Stapleton and James Benn and Neville Cosworth, Tom Hempenstall, all of whom I knew through work. But it also was, again, a time of technology change. And I can remember being asked by a private equity group to a lunch in the late 90s. There were about 8 of us around the table. And again, it was a group that was devoted to the media. And the question at the end of the lunch was, what do you think is the most important sort of innovation and bit of technology? And the answer around the table was email. And that seems incredible now, that seemed the big communication innovation. But if you look back, of course, our emails were really only starting mid-90s, late 90s on a day-to-day basis. And people would say, no, I like to do my own. Later, of course, they said, no, I would like my assistant to vet them so that I only have about 3 to look at. But it was, we've come a long way.
Amazing. And I can remember before email really came in, people saying, of course, there's something on hot on the sort of off the press about this extraordinary thing where you'll be able to send communications instead of by letter, and you sort of took it with a pinch of salt. Thought, yes, well, I'll believe that when I see it. But certainly by the time I was Dean of Norwich in the second half of the 90s, email was it. So the Van Tulleken company, is it still going?
No, it isn't. So in 2008, I sold it. I really merged it with the Scottish investment bank, Quayle Monroe. I had a much younger staff, and this gave us an opportunity to work on a bigger canvas. And the Quayle Monroe was looking for a London base, and they had bought Peter Norris's firm, New Boat House Capital. And so we had been in discussions with New Boat House about joining forces, but couldn't sort of find a catalyst. So the end of early 2008, we did that. And I stayed with the company mainly to work on the main board. It was a PLC for 2 years, and then decided it was enough. It was the sort of thing that I would be advising my own clients. Don't plan on staying around if you've sold your own, your personally founded company. And I was interested in what Christopher Mayer said, that he thought after he retired that a non-exec portfolio would present itself. And I rather thought that would happen as well. But in fact, a number of clients got in touch with me and said, oh, we'd like to continue working with you. And then there were smaller businesses who came along every year and said, we'd still like you to handle our sale. So I just set up my own LLP. I moved into the John Murray building on Albemarle Street, which I love. There's a lot of other amiable people, a literary agency and a publisher and Ashcombe Advisors, and and the Murrays. And so I've operated from there ever since. And so I haven't retired, but my day is obviously different. I work with Shakespeare's Globe and their campaign committee. I'm on the McGill Regional Advisory Board, and we meet regularly, virtually now, obviously. I advise the Cundall History Prize, the largest international history prize, and overall keep rather busy. And I still have clients here and in the States.
Yeah, sure. One of those people who I think I'd say, of course, Kit will never retire, she'll just be morphing into doing something different, have a bit more flexibility. So, well, let's just finish with stationers, which goes back quite a way with you now. But, if I said to you, well, perhaps in the light of the pandemic and so on and so forth, what can you think of something exciting that that stationers ought to be thinking of for their next bit, apart from the fact that we have a new hall, and well, not a new hall, but what would you think? Where do you think stationers might be thinking new things?
Well, I think it's already started, because in the last few years, I think many more young people have joined the company. I could be wrong in that. I don't have the statistics, but my sense is there is activity from a younger group. And I think that's terribly important. It's very easy to make the stationers, a livery company, some council that one is on, become your life after retirement. And I think what's really important is to let that next generation come along. The stationers is unusual, as we know, from drawing from its trades, but it's more than other livery companies that draw from the trades, because we have a number of trades and we're rather interconnected, but we're also come from very sociable trades. you know, we do send emails and write letters, and we like a social life and a drink and getting together. Not every trade is like that. And I think so. We're a rather amiable, jolly group, but it's also a great networking place. We have a fabulous hall, which I have really campaigned to get people to recognize is a heritage and must be protected. We have a fantastic archive. It's just eye-watering how important it is. And so for the next generation, I would say, get involved. The network is wonderful. The social life is wonderful. You can do good. We do a lot of charitable work. And if you want to feel as you reach your retirement, that you'd like to look back and see that the heritage is there, that if you look after it now, that will be your legacy.
That's a wonderful message, Kit, on which to finish. Thank you so much. It's been really exciting. I felt quite sort of almost exhausted by listening to what, what had happened over all those years. Anyway, thank you so much, and look forward to seeing you soon in the hall. Yeah.
We'll see you very soon. Thank you, Stephen. Bye.
Bye.